He woke up before dawn, as he did every day, the quiet hum of the city barely stirring outside his small apartment. The streets were still wet from the previous night's rain, reflecting the dim lights that flickered like tired stars. He went through his routine with care, brushing his teeth slowly, folding his old clothes neatly, and preparing a simple breakfast of bread and tea. Nothing about his life invited attention, and he liked it that way. By the time he reached the corporate building where he worked, the sun was just beginning to peek through the high glass towers. He walked through the revolving doors and nodded to the receptionist, who barely looked up from her phone. He stood at his post by the front entrance, uniform pressed and shoes polished, though they were clearly old. People hurried past him, heads down, coffee cups in hand, smartphones glued to their faces. Many didn't even notice him. Some did, and they snickered quietly, pointing out his worn shoes or the small tear in his jacket. He ignored it all. He had long learned that the world paid attention only to appearances, not to substance. It was a regular day, or so it seemed. Executives in crisp suits laughed loudly as they passed him, making jokes about his quiet demeanor. A group of interns whispered to each other, casting glances that were heavy with judgment. Even the cleaning staff, who usually smiled politely at him, seemed to treat him with the kind of detached amusement that made him feel invisible. Yet, he carried himself with a calm dignity, never allowing their mockery to touch him. There was a depth in his eyes, a kind of patience that no one could understand. They saw only the uniform, the job, the status they had decided to assign him. He had chosen this life, though none of them could ever know why. He had walked away from wealth, from comfort, from everything people would have envied. He had built a life in silence, away from the noise of expectations, and now he observed the world from the shadows. He noticed things others didn't, the small acts of kindness, the subtle ways people treated one another when they thought no one was watching, the little moments of honesty and deceit. This job, this ordinary role in a bustling office, was his way of seeing life as it truly was. During lunch, he sat on a bench outside the building, quietly eating his simple meal. A few colleagues passed by, laughing about some trivial gossip, and one of them made a loud comment about his sandwich. He smiled politely and went on eating. Inside, the office was full of chatter, people calling out orders, phones ringing nonstop. The air thick with self-importance. He had seen it all before, the endless pursuit of recognition, the constant need to prove oneself, the endless cycle of ego and envy. And yet, he found a strange peace in his quiet routine. In the invisibility that allowed him to see clearly, a child's laughter suddenly echoed from the street nearby, and he paused to watch a little boy chase after a stray dog. There was a purity in that moment, a reminder that life could still be simple, still be honest, still be good.
Ow.
He remembered his own childhood, the lessons of patience and resilience that had been instilled in him, the early struggles that had shaped the man he had become. He had learned that true strength was not shown through power or wealth, but through character, through the ability to endure, to observe, to understand. Back inside, a group of employees blocked the hallway, joking loudly as they passed. One of them, a young man with an arrogant smirk, nudged him with his shoulder and whispered something about how he must be dreaming of being part of their world. He simply nodded, letting the moment pass without confrontation. He had long realized that anger, resentment, or pride would only cloud his clarity. Instead, he chose patience. Knowing that life had a way of revealing the truth in time, the day continued in its usual rhythm. Packages were delivered, meetings were held, and people went about their business as if the world revolved around them. He stood silently, observing. He noticed the small things. The tired smile of the receptionist who had been working late last night. The way the janitor carefully cleaned a spill without anyone noticing. The subtle tension between colleagues who were competing for attention and recognition. These details mattered to him, for they revealed the real nature of the people around him, far beyond the superficial judgments, as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows. Casting long shadows across the marble floors, he felt a quiet satisfaction. Despite being mocked and ignored, he knew he held a secret, a knowledge of the world that others could not perceive. He understood the true value of patience, humility, and observation. He understood that appearances were deceiving, and that true worth was often hidden from the eyes of the impatient, the shallow. When the final employees left and the building quieted, he remained at his post a little longer. The city lights reflected off the glass towers outside, and he thought about the lives of the people he had observed that day. He knew their ambitions, their weaknesses, their small acts of kindness and cruelty, even if they did not know him. And in that quiet, he felt a sense of power, not the power that money or status could bring, but the quiet, unshakable power of understanding, of knowing the truth behind the facets. Finally, he walked home, under the soft glow of streetlights. The streets were calm now, the noise of the day fading into the distance. He passed a shop window and saw his reflection in the glass. A simple man, unremarkable to most, yet carrying a world of knowledge, a history of struggles, triumphs, and secrets. He smiled faintly, a small private smile. No one had guessed, no one could know, and that was exactly as he wanted it. At home, he prepared for the next day, following the same careful routine. He knew tomorrow would be much like today, filled with the same challenges, the same mockery, the same unnoticed observations. But he welcomed it. Each day was a chance to see, to understand, to live quietly, while others rushed blindly toward their own illusions of success. And in that quiet life, he found something far greater than fame or wealth. He found clarity, patience, and the quiet satisfaction of a man who knew the truth about the world, and more importantly, about himself. He sat alone in his small apartment. The hum of the city below, a constant reminder of the life outside his window. The night was quiet, yet his mind was alive with memories he rarely shared. Memories of a time when his life had been very different, when he had everything the world told him should matter: wealth, status, influence, but none of it had brought him peace. He remembered the first time he had built a business from nothing, working long nights, sacrificing comfort, and trusting people who would eventually betray him. Those betrayals had left scars that were invisible to others but burned deeply within him. He remembered the people who had flattered him, who had laughed at his jokes and praised his success. At the time, he had believed they were friends, allies, perhaps even family, but soon the masks had fallen, and he had seen their true colors. Some had tried to take advantage of his trust. Others had envied him silently and plotted in the shadows. The betrayal had been crushing, leaving him with a sense of emptiness no amount of money could fill. He had realized that the world he had fought so hard to enter was built on false smiles and hollow words. The decision to walk away from it all had not been easy. He had sold businesses, withdrawn from public life, and given up the trappings of wealth that had once defined him. People had assumed he had lost everything through bad luck or poor choices. In truth, he had chosen a simpler, quieter life. He had chosen to observe, to live among ordinary people, to understand the world in a way he never could while wrapped in the illusions of power and influence. He wanted to see people as they truly were, without the filter of money and status. He had taken the job as a security guard not because he needed the money, but because it offered him the perfect vantage point. Standing quietly at the entrance of the corporate building, he could watch human behavior unfold in its rawest form. He saw ambition, jealousy, love, kindness, and cruelty all in one place. He saw who helped others without expecting anything in return and who used people as stepping stones for personal gain. He had become a silent judge of character, noting everything, remembering everything. There were moments when the mockery of his colleagues stung, but he had learned to smile politely and let it pass. He knew that those who laughed at him had no idea of the man they were underestimating. Their insults were meaningless to someone who had already faced the harshest betrayals life could offer and come through stronger. He had learned to protect himself not with anger or pride, but with calm observation and understanding. One evening, as he prepared to leave his post, he noticed a young intern struggling with a heavy box near the elevator. Others passed by without offering help, absorbed in their own worlds. Without thinking, he stepped forward and took the box from the young man, setting it down safely. The intern looked up at him with wide eyes and a shy smile, mumbling a quiet thank you. For the first time that day, the guard felt a small warmth in his chest, a reminder that acts of kindness, however small, still mattered. As the weeks passed, he began to notice more small gestures of humanity. The cleaning lady who stayed late to ensure the floors were spotless, the receptionist who quietly helped lost visitors find their way, the janitor who fixed things without anyone noticing or acknowledging it. These small acts fascinated him because they were genuine. In a world full of pretension, these moments were rare and precious. He began to pay closer attention, recording not just the mistakes and faults of those around him, but also their acts of goodness. Despite his quiet life, he occasionally felt pangs of loneliness. He had friends once, but those relationships had been tainted by envy and deceit. He had loved deeply, only to be left heartbroken. Love had been another battlefield, where appearances mattered more than substance. He had learned that genuine connections were rare and that most people were incapable of understanding the complexities of a life lived in shadow and reflection. Yet he had not given up hope. He believed, perhaps foolishly, that somewhere there were people who valued honesty, kindness, and integrity over wealth and status. One rainy afternoon, while the office buzzed with frantic activity, he noticed a young woman struggling with a stack of papers. She had been working late, and the rain had soaked her coat. No one else seemed to notice her predicament. Without a word, he offered her an umbrella and helped her carry the papers to her desk. She looked at him, surprised, then smiled gratefully. That simple moment reminded him of why he had chosen this life. It was not about recognition or reward. It was about understanding. It's about silently making the world a little better without anyone knowing. At home that evening, he reflected on the day. He had observed so much, learned so much, yet shared so little. He wrote down notes about what he had seen, not for anyone else, but for himself. He noted the patterns of human behavior, the small acts of integrity, the moments when people showed courage or weakness. These observations were his treasure, far more valuable than any bank account or title could ever be. He knew that eventually. His past might collide with his present. There would come a day when the truth of who he was could no longer remain hidden. He did not fear that day because he had prepared himself for it. He had chosen this life consciously, understanding that the world would judge him for the role he played now. Unaware of the depth and complexity of the man beneath the uniform, as the city slept, he sat by the window, watching the lights flicker and the streets empty. He felt a sense of peace, knowing that he was living life on his own terms. He had chosen observation over participation, humility over pride, patience over anger. And in that choice, he had found freedom. The world mocked him, ignored him, underestimated him, but he did not mind. He had already won the most important battles, those of understanding, his patience and self-respect. He drifted off to sleep that night with a quiet smile, ready to face another day. Tomorrow would bring the same challenges, the same people, the same mix of kindness and cruelty. But he welcomed it all. Every day was an opportunity to see, to understand, to live quietly and meaningfully. He knew that his secret, his past, and his experiences would one day reveal a truth that could not be ignored. And when that day came, the world would see not just a security guard, but a man who had walked through the trials of life, learned its lessons, and remained steadfast in his values. Until then, he would continue his silent vigil, observing, learning, and living a life richer than anyone could imagine. Days passed quietly, yet quietly carried its own weight of stories, hidden dramas, and unnoticed heroism. He went through the building as he always did, standing at his post, watching, observing, noting every small detail. He had learned that life often revealed itself in tiny gestures, in moments overlooked by the majority. And that was where he found meaning one morning. As he was checking the lobby, he noticed a young delivery boy struggling to push a heavy cart filled with parcels. The boy's face was strained with effort, and the wheels of the cart caught on the uneven tiles. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, steadying the cart and guiding the boy safely through the doors. The boy looked at him, eyes wide with surprise, and murmured a shy thank you. He nodded, offering nothing more, his satisfaction coming from the boy's relieved smile. Throughout the day, he continued to notice small acts that others ignored. A janitor, quietly repairing a broken railing without asking for recognition. A young intern comforting a colleague who had dropped her papers. The receptionist offering a warm word to a visitor who seemed lost. These moments, invisible to most, were treasures to him. They spoke of sincerity and compassion, qualities that often went unnoticed in the rush of everyday life. He began to act in subtle ways, helping where he could without making it obvious. He fixed a jammed printer when the office staff had given up, quietly left an umbrella for someone who had forgotten theirs in the rain, or guided lost visitors without drawing attention to himself. Each action was small, seemingly insignificant, but in his heart, he knew they mattered. He began to see how the world could be improved through kindness, and how often that improvement required no grand gestures, only quiet attentiveness. One afternoon, a crisis unfolded that required his attention. A young woman, clearly exhausted, had been working late and had left her bag on the floor, knocking over a box of important documents. Others walked past, too busy with their own tasks to help. He stepped forward and helped her gather the papers, carefully checking each one to ensure nothing was missing. She looked at him with gratitude, surprised at the care he had taken. In that moment, he felt the familiar warmth. It came from helping others without expecting anything in return. His actions did not go unnoticed by all. A few colleagues began to observe his behavior, puzzled by his quiet diligence. They whispered about how he always seemed to know when someone needed help, how he moved without drawing attention, and how he never sought recognition. But even their curiosity was shallow, lacking the depth to understand the man behind the uniform. To them, he remained a mystery, an enigma wrapped in plain clothing and modest demeanor. At home, he reflected on these interactions. He thought about the lives of the people he helped, about the small but meaningful changes he had brought into their days. He remembered the young delivery boy's grateful smile, the intern's relieved expression, and the receptionist's quiet nod of appreciation. These were the moments that reminded him why he had chosen this path, why he had walked away from a life of wealth and comfort. True fulfillment came not from power or status, but from making a tangible difference in the lives of others. He also noticed patterns in the behavior of those around him. Some people acted with genuine kindness, others with calculated politeness, and still others with hidden envy or malice. He had long ago learned to distinguish between them, to see beneath the surface and understand the motivations driving each action. This knowledge allowed him to navigate the complexities of human behavior, to offer help where it was needed, and to avoid entanglement with those who might exploit his kindness. One rainy evening, as he was closing up the lobby, he saw an elderly man struggling with a heavy suitcase, trying to make his way to a taxi. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, lifting the suitcase and guiding the man safely through the doors. The elderly man looked at him with wide eyes, overwhelmed by the unexpected assistance. The guard smiled gently, feeling the quiet satisfaction that came from helping someone in need without expecting anything in return. It was a small act, yet in that moment, it felt monumental. These acts of kindness began to form a pattern. The security guard, long overlooked and mocked, had become an unseen guardian, silently shaping the environment around him. People who had never paid him attention started to feel a subtle shift, a sense of reassurance that someone was quietly watching over them. They didn't know his story, didn't know his past, didn't understand the depth of his character. All they knew was that the world seemed slightly kinder, slightly safer, with him present, as the days turned into weeks. He continued this quiet mission. He helped a struggling janitor find a missing tool, guided a nervous intern through the complexities of the building, and discreetly fixed small problems that others ignored. Each act was a thread, weaving a tapestry of quiet compassion and unnoticed heroism. He found joy in these moments, a sense of purpose that no wealth or recognition could provide. At night, he often sat by his window, reflecting on the day's events. He thought about the people he had helped, the small victories that went unseen, and the patterns of kindness and cruelty that defined human behavior. He felt a deep connection to the world around him, a sense of understanding that transcended social status and superficial judgments. In his quiet way, he was making a difference, shaping lives without anyone realizing it. He also began to see the potential in people he had once overlooked. The young intern, who had seemed timid and unsure, began to show confidence and initiative. The delivery boy, once struggling with simple tasks, moved with more ease and assurance. The receptionist, who had been weary and overworked, smiled more often, buoyed by the small support he offered. These changes were subtle, yet meaningful. Proof that kindness and attentiveness could ripple outward, affecting more lives than one could ever imagine. Even in moments of mockery or disdain, he remained steady. Colleagues continued to joke about his worn shoes, his quiet demeanor, and his humble role. Yet he met these moments with calm patience, understanding that their words held no real power over him. They saw only the surface, unaware of the depth and history that lay beneath. He had learned long ago that true strength came not from confrontation, but from quiet resilience and a steadfast commitment to one's values. As he prepared to leave for the night, he felt a sense of satisfaction that was rare in the world. The building was quiet, the lights dimmed, and the city stretched out before him, full of possibilities and stories. He walked home slowly, taking in the sights and sounds, observing the small dramas that played out in the streets below. Each interaction, each moment of kindness or struggle was part of a larger picture, a tapestry of life that he was quietly shaping through his actions. At home, he reflected on the week's events. He wrote notes about the people he had observed, the small acts of kindness he had witnessed, and the moments of genuine human connection that had touched him. These notes were not for anyone else. They were a record of life as he truly saw it, unfiltered by status or expectation. In these quiet reflections, he found purpose, understanding, and a sense of fulfillment that wealth or recognition could never provide. He drifted off to sleep that night with a quiet contentment, knowing that his actions, though unseen, were making a difference. The world continued to move around him, full of noise and distraction, yet he had found a way to live meaningfully within it. Each day brought new opportunities for kindness, new chances to observe, to understand, and to help without recognition. And in that quiet, steady way, he was slowly changing the world. One small act at a time. The day began like any other, the city waking slowly under a soft gray sky. He arrived at his post early, the crisp morning air brushing against his face as he settled into his usual spot. Everything seemed ordinary, yet he sensed that today would be different. There was a tension in the building, subtle but palpable, that made him alert and focused in a way he rarely had to be. He had learned to trust these instincts. They had never failed him. By mid-morning, the ordinary rhythm of the office was disrupted. A financial report had gone missing, a package had been misplaced, and a minor security alert had triggered a flurry of activity. Employees panicked, rushing through the hallways, calling supervisors, and blaming one another. In the chaos, he remained calm, observing, noting details others missed. He moved through the crowd quietly, assessing the situation without drawing attention. His presence was unnoticed, yet it held an unspoken authority, the kind that comes from understanding, not position. He stepped into the server room, where the problem seemed to have originated. A young intern was struggling to fix a technical error, her hands shaking with frustration. He knelt beside her, guiding her through the process without taking over, offering steady instructions and quiet reassurance. Within minutes, the error was corrected, and the panic subsided in that small corner of the building. The intern looked up at him, relief washing over her face, and whispered a heartfelt thank you. He simply nodded, moving on to the next problem. As the morning progressed, more issues arose. A delivery truck had been delayed, a visitor was lost in the building, and a minor electrical fault caused the elevators to stop temporarily. He responded to each challenge calmly, offering assistance, coordinating with the staff, and keeping the flow of the day from descending into total chaos. Slowly, people began to notice his competence, though they did not yet understand its source. They whispered to each other, curiosity growing about the quiet security guard who seemed to know exactly what to do. Then, a moment came that would change everything. A serious financial error had been discovered in the company's accounts, one that threatened to expose the building to legal and financial trouble. Panic spread quickly, and senior executives scrambled to respond, their voices raised in confusion and fear. He observed silently, understanding the gravity of the situation. He knew that only swift, decisive action could prevent disaster, and he knew exactly who to call. He stepped into a quiet office and made a single phone call. Within minutes, powerful individuals arrived. Professionals who moved with confidence and authority, ready to take control of the crisis. Whispers began to circulate among the staff, confusion mixing with awe, as they realized that this security guard had made a call that brought in people of influence who could resolve the situation immediately. They looked at him with a new kind of attention, a mixture of curiosity, disbelief, and respect. Then the truth came out. One of the executives spoke up, explaining to the staff that the man they had mocked, ignored, and underestimated for years was not just a security guard. He was the billionaire investor, the owner behind the company. The very person whose wealth and influence had been quietly keeping everything afloat. Gasps filled the room, eyes widened, and a heavy silence settled over the crowd. Those who had laughed at him, mocked him, and treated him with disdain now faced the reality that they had judged someone entirely by appearances. Missing the truth beneath the surface, he stood quietly, calm as always, observing the reactions. There were apologies whispered, faces red with embarrassment, expressions of shock from those who had never imagined such a revelation. Yet he did not seek vengeance. His goal had never been to humiliate or punish. He had sought only to observe, to understand, and to act when necessary. The lessons of his past had taught him that revenge was empty. But guidance and fairness could change lives. The staff began to see him differently. Those who had shown genuine kindness before the revelation found themselves treated with warmth and consideration. Their efforts and small acts of integrity were acknowledged and quietly rewarded. Those who had mocked him learned a hard lesson about judgment, humility, and the importance of looking beyond appearances. He had changed the dynamic of the building without raising his voice or demanding attention, simply by being consistent, observant, and ready when it mattered most. As the day unfolded, he walked through the office addressing issues with quiet authority, offering guidance and supporting those in need. People who had previously ignored him now sought his advice, amazed by the depth of his knowledge, skill, and understanding. Yet he moved among them with the same calm humility, never flaunting his status, never demanding acknowledgement. His presence alone had shifted the atmosphere, creating an environment where competence, kindness, and integrity were finally recognized throughout the day. He reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about the years of building his empire, the betrayals he had endured, and the deliberate choice to walk away from wealth and status to live a life of quiet observation. He realized that this moment, this revelation, was not an accident but the result of his patience, his understanding of human nature, and his unwavering commitment to his values. He saw the faces of his colleagues. The young intern who had learned confidence, the delivery boy who had gained pride in his work, the receptionist whose small acts of kindness had finally been acknowledged. Each one of them represented a thread in the tapestry he had quietly woven over the years. His influence had spread not through power or fear, but through example, observation, and the subtle guidance of a man who had chosen to live with integrity. As evening approached and the building quieted once more, he returned to his post, observing the city through the glass doors. The day had brought a revelation that would change the lives of many, but for him, it was another step in a longer journey. He understood that true leadership, true influence, and true impact came not from wealth or status alone, but from the ability to observe, understand, and act with wisdom and compassion. He left the building later that night, the streets quiet and glistening with recent rain. People who had once mocked him looked on with newfound respect and understanding, though many still did not fully grasp the depth of his experience. He walked with the calm confidence of a man who had faced life's greatest challenges and emerged stronger. A man who had lived quietly, observed deeply, and acted decisively when it mattered most. At home, he sat by the window, reflecting on the day's events. He thought about the lessons learned, the reactions of those around him, and the subtle ways in which he had guided the building through crisis. He smiled faintly, knowing that the revelation of his identity was not the culmination of his journey, but a continuation of a life lived with purpose, patience, and unwavering integrity. He had shown the world in his own quiet way that true value was not measured by appearances, but by character, understanding, and the courage to act when it truly mattered. He drifted into sleep that night, the city lights casting gentle shadows across his room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new moments to observe and guide. But he knew that the day's events had changed the course of many lives, teaching lessons of humility, kindness, and the importance of looking beyond the surface. And in that quiet knowledge he found a sense of fulfillment that no applause, recognition, or wealth could ever match. The morning after the revelation, the building had a different rhythm. There was a quiet energy in the hallways, a sense of curiosity mixed with cautious respect. People who had once overlooked him or mocked him now moved with awareness, their eyes occasionally finding his, searching for a sign of what kind of man he truly was. He moved among them with the same calm, measured steps he had always taken, aware of their reactions but not seeking to manipulate them. His presence alone was enough to inspire thought, reflection, and a subtle shift in behavior. Some approached him directly, offering apologies for past mockery or expressing gratitude for his quiet guidance. He listened, nodding, sometimes offering a small word of encouragement, but never dwelling on the past. He understood that humility was more powerful than pride, and forgiveness more transformative than resentment. Those who had shown him kindness before the revelation were quietly acknowledged, their efforts recognized in small but meaningful ways. It was a lesson in integrity that he had lived for years, and now others were beginning to understand it. The young intern, who had once struggled with confidence, now approached him with a new sense of assurance. She had learned that competence and character mattered more than appearances, and she sought his advice on navigating challenges without losing herself. He guided her gently, sharing insights not just about work, but about life, about patience, observation, and the quiet power of integrity. Each conversation was a thread, strengthening the fabric of understanding between them, teaching lessons that would last far beyond the walls of the building. The delivery boy, who had once struggled with simple tasks, now moved with pride and a sense of purpose. He had learned that diligence and honesty did not go unnoticed, even if recognition was delayed. The elderly receptionist, whose quiet acts of kindness had once gone unnoticed, now found herself treated with respect and consideration. Small gestures were acknowledged, and the subtle changes in the building's atmosphere were visible to those who paid attention. It was a reminder that influence did not always come from power or status, but from consistent, thoughtful action. Throughout the day, he continued to observe, guide, and support. He addressed issues calmly, offering solutions and assistance without drawing attention to himself. The staff began to rely on him not out of fear or obligation, but out of respect for his insight, judgment, and quiet wisdom. Even those who had once doubted him found themselves learning from his example, understanding that leadership could take many forms, and that sometimes the greatest leaders were those who worked silently behind the scenes. By afternoon, the lessons of the previous day had begun to take hold. People were more considerate of one another, offering help where it was needed, and recognizing the value of integrity and kindness. The building, once full of noise, competition, and shallow judgments, had shifted subtly toward a place of cooperation, respect, and understanding. He watched these changes with satisfaction, knowing that the seeds he had planted through quiet guidance were beginning to grow. Despite the recognition and newfound respect, he remained grounded. He did not seek accolades or rewards. His satisfaction came from the knowledge that he had lived in accordance with his values, that he had guided others without coercion or display, and that the world was slightly better for it. He understood that true influence was not about being seen, but about making a meaningful impact, no matter how quietly. As the day ended, he walked through the building one last time, ensuring everything was in order. He paused to speak with a few staff members, offering gentle advice, encouragement, and appreciation for their efforts. Each interaction reinforced the lessons he had silently imparted over time, that character mattered more than status, that kindness could ripple outward, and that understanding others required patience, observation, and empathy. That evening, as he returned home, the city was alive with lights and activity. He walked slowly, taking in the scenes of life unfolding around him. Children played in the park, neighbors greeted one another, and the ordinary struggles of daily life carried on. He felt a deep connection to this world, knowing that he had contributed in some small way to its improvement. The satisfaction of meaningful action, the peace of quiet understanding, and the knowledge of his own integrity filled him with a profound sense of fulfillment. At home, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point, from wealth, betrayal, and disillusionment to a life of quiet observation and subtle guidance. He had learned lessons that few could understand. He had seen human nature in its rawest form, experienced kindness and cruelty, and discovered that true value lay not in appearances or recognition, but in the choices one made and the integrity one maintained. He thought about the people he had helped, the lives he had touched, and the subtle changes he had inspired. Each small act of guidance, each quiet intervention, had contributed to a larger shift, one that would continue long after the immediate events had passed. He understood that his impact was measured not by applause, but by the growth, confidence, and understanding of those around him as night fell. He prepared for the next day, knowing that life would continue with its challenges, surprises, and small opportunities for kindness. He understood that the revelation of his identity was not the end, but a continuation of a larger journey. The lessons he had imparted, the changes he had inspired, and the quiet influence he had exercised would carry forward. Shaping the lives of others in ways both seen and unseen, he drifted into sleep with a sense of peace and fulfillment, knowing that he had lived in accordance with his principles, guided by observation, understanding, and empathy. The world outside continued its rhythm, unaware of the quiet guardian who had subtly shifted its course. Yet, within him, there was a deep satisfaction in the knowledge that true value had been recognized. Lessons had been learned, and the lives of those around him had been enriched by the quiet actions of a man who had once been mocked, yet had emerged as a guiding force of integrity and kindness. In the days and weeks that followed, the building continued to thrive under the influence of these lessons. The young intern flourished in her confidence and skill. The delivery boy carried out his tasks with pride, and the staff collectively learned the importance of empathy, respect, and genuine consideration for one another. The small but meaningful changes persisted, a testament to the quiet power of patience, observation, and integrity. And he, the man who had once been overlooked and mocked, continued to live his life with calm dignity, knowing that the true measure of his influence was not in recognition or applause, but in the lives he had touched and the values he had upheld, even after the revelation of his identity. He continued to live quietly, taking no advantage of his wealth or influence for personal gain. The building, now aware of his past, treated him with respect, but he remained humble, moving silently through the hallways and continuing to observe the people around him. He had come to understand that true leadership was not about recognition or power, but about supporting others and quietly guiding them toward better choices. Early one morning, he noticed a young woman sitting alone in the lobby, her eyes downcast as she clutched a small notebook. Something in her demeanor suggested fear and uncertainty. He approached gently, offering a warm smile and a quiet question about whether she needed help. She looked up, startled by his presence, then nodded hesitantly. He guided her to a bench, asked her to explain her concerns, and listened patiently. As she spoke, it became clear she was struggling to balance her work responsibilities with personal challenges at home. He offered practical advice, shared some coping strategies, and encouraged her to reach out to colleagues when support was needed. By the end of their conversation, she sat taller, more confident, with a faint smile on her face. As the days passed, he continued to notice similar situations around the building. A young man who had recently started a new position seemed anxious, unsure of how to approach his tasks. He quietly intervened, guiding the young man through the workflow, explaining procedures in a way that built confidence rather than dependency. Slowly, the young man began to perform his duties with competence and pride. Others in the building, observing these interactions, began to understand that support and guidance were more valuable than criticism or mockery. He also saw the importance of correcting injustices, not in a dramatic way, but through subtle and careful action. One day, he noticed a colleague being unfairly criticized during a meeting. The blame for a small mistake placed disproportionately on her shoulders. Without interrupting the meeting, he made discreet inquiries later, gathering evidence of the circumstances and speaking privately with the supervisor. The situation was resolved quietly, the colleague receiving the acknowledgement and correction she deserved. She looked at him later with gratitude, though he offered nothing in return, knowing that fairness itself was the reward. Throughout this time, he observed not only the actions of individuals, but the culture of the organization as a whole. He noted patterns of kindness and cruelty, moments of generosity and selfishness, and small gestures that revealed true character. He began to guide the culture subtly, highlighting good behavior, encouraging collaboration, and setting an example of patience and empathy. Without imposing authority or making his power known, he influenced the environment toward cooperation and understanding. One afternoon, during a particularly busy period, he noticed a young intern struggling to understand a complex report. Others walked past, busy with their own tasks. He knelt beside the intern, explaining the report in simple, clear terms. Breaking down the steps and answering questions with patience, the intern's eyes lit up with understanding, and she completed her work confidently. This small success, like many before it, reinforced the idea that guidance, empathy, and clarity could have a lasting impact. He also observed the importance of emotional support. A staff member who had recently experienced a personal loss appeared withdrawn, avoiding social interaction. He found a quiet moment to offer words of comfort, acknowledging the difficulty of the situation without prying into personal details. His empathy, delivered without judgment or expectation, provided solace and encouragement. Over time, the staff member began to engage more openly. Carrying a sense of renewed resilience, despite his continued humility, others began to recognize the influence he held over the building's atmosphere. People sought his advice, appreciated his interventions, and noticed the changes in the culture around them. Yet he remained consistent, never seeking recognition or reward. Understanding that true influence came from action and integrity rather than title or applause. He also reflected on his own journey, remembering the decisions that had led him here, the choice to leave behind wealth and power, the decision to live a quiet, observant life, and the commitment to act with integrity and empathy. Each moment of reflection reinforced his understanding that fulfillment came not from status or recognition, but from the ability to quietly impact lives and shape a community with patience and compassion. One evening, he observed a group of employees helping each other with a large project, offering suggestions, encouragement, and support without prompting. The environment of cooperation and understanding had begun to take root, a subtle but meaningful transformation. He smiled quietly, knowing that his influence had played a role, not through control or dominance, but through patient guidance, consistent example, and thoughtful intervention. As he walked home later that night, the streets glistening with recent rain, he felt a sense of contentment. He had learned that life's value lay not in wealth, status, or recognition, but in the lives touched, the guidance given, and the culture nurtured. He understood that the ripples of kindness, empathy, and integrity could spread far beyond immediate actions, influencing the broader world in ways that were often unseen. At home, he sat by the window, watching the city lights, reflecting on the weeks and months since the revelation of his identity. He thought about the people he had guided, the small acts of fairness and empathy, and the subtle shifts in the environment around him. He realized that the greatest fulfillment came from consistent, quiet action, the kind that built character, strengthened confidence, and nurtured human connection. He drifted into sleep with a sense of peace, knowing that he had lived his life according to his principles, guiding others with empathy and integrity, influencing the environment with quiet consistency, and teaching lessons that would resonate long after immediate recognition had faded. The city continued its rhythm, full of ordinary struggles and unnoticed kindness. But within that rhythm, he had left a lasting imprint. A quiet reminder that true value is measured not by appearances, wealth, or power, but by character, patience, and the gentle guidance offered to those around us.